Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we will travel to Europe, but to the past, to the time of Attila. Who were these riders before the songs got loud? What really passed between a bishop in white and a warlord on a dark horse on the road to Italy? And when the last toast cooled and the drumbeat shifted, how did an empire you could fold and carry refuse to vanish, echoing in rivers, laws and sagas long after Nadao? Come warm your hands by the kettle. The hoofbeats are already telling the story. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. You hear the river before you see it. A slow shoulder of a water pushing past reeds, something hollow knocking softly against a piling. The little hush a current makes when it drapes around a stone and decides to keep going. The night holds its breath just enough to let a kettle whisper in a felt-walled tent. There is a bowstring somewhere that answers the cold with a small approving thrum, and along the bank lights bloom in pairs, one on the Roman side, one on the rider's side, so the Danube looks like a long line of thoughtful candles deciding whether to be a road. Come closer to the fire. The water warms the air just a finger's width. You can sit near the kettle and let your breath turn into a tiny private cloud. We begin here under felt and stars and riverlight at the edge of what Rome calls the world and the riders call a convenient crossing. People will later call these riders the Huns of Europe. For now they are new neighbours who arrived not with marble and laws, but with horse herds, iron cauldrons, and a way of moving that makes a map look unprepared. They set their camps where ground and grass agree, where driftwood means fires for a week, where Roman watchtowers stand on tidy piles of stone and send messages by flame, the way a clerk sends them by ink. The riders answer with their own signals: 3 horsemen on a ridge, a blanket hung at a particular angle, a tune played on a small pipe that says more than its little voice suggests. If the stars are lanes, the Danube tonight is a border with ears. Rivers do a certain kind of magic to an empire. They enforce patience. They collect rumour like drift. And in a winter near the end of the 4th century, rumour rides faster than most governors would prefer. It says that beyond the Black Sea, beyond the grasses that behave like oceans, a people have appeared who can turn distance into a minor inconvenience. Rumour says they came from the east where the light is loud. Rumour says they chased wolves for practice and now find men slower than wolves. Rumour says too much, as rumour always does, but a few things hold steady when boiled. New riders have arrived, old neighbours are moving because of it. The Danube hears it all and keeps its counsel, which is a river's special virtue. South of the river, in rooms that smell of parchment and lamp oil, Rome keeps its own council. The empire is still great in the way a fire is great late in the evening, heat in the hall, certainty in the coals, a need to poke things just right. The Eastern Court writes with Constantinople's hand, the Western Court writes with Ravenna's. Both prefer paper to hoofbeats, and both have already learned that sometimes it is cheaper to hire a problem than to fight it. They have words for this: foederati, federate treaties, annuities that taste like peace when the coins are new. They have watchtowers that blink to one another at night like cousins passing secrets. They have roads, the honest Roman kind that run straight as a magistrate's mouth. North of the river, under the big winter, the riders wait with the patience of people who know the weather will do half their bargaining if they stand in the right place and keep their animals fed. They build fires that give off a heat you feel at shin level. They boil something in a bronze cauldron that smells like meat and the gladness of salt. Saddles rest on stands like faithful dogs. The tents have a habit of making even careful men feel welcome, which is a power brick walls never quite learned. You can sit inside and listen to a drum, keep a walk-tempo heartbeat, and a singer tell a story that is mostly facts and a little hope. If you smile at the right time, someone will pass you a bowl and say drink. It's the kind that warms you before it decides whether to be delicious. If you ask ordinary questions, you will learn extraordinary truths. How long a horse can work if you don't make it pretend to be a cart? How far a courier can ride if he knows exactly where the next apple waits? How a felt flap can behave like a door and like a lung? Roman books will later describe these riders with the big brush a man uses when he can't afford detail. They will say the Huns cut their cheeks to keep their beards from growing and that they were born for the saddle as others are born for the floor. They will say the people behind the bow belong to a darkness east of the day. It is the way empires tell themselves they are not ordinary. But if you stand by the river and talk to anyone who knows how to talk, you find men who worry about weather and grain and whether a favourite horse is sound. A confederation with many languages and the single shared grammar of getting through winter. There are Alans with a taste for thin-walled cups and long hair. There are Goths who have learned to obey men they once would have challenged, and to challenge men they once would have avoided. There are little clans whose names do not travel far, but whose arrows do. The Hunnic tent makes room, by persuasion and by necessity, and calls the whole arrangement our people. Listen to an old Roman soldier, if you find one who will admit to remembering hunger. He will tell you about a year when whole families of Goths appeared at the Danube, tired and polite and desperate to be on this side of the water. He will say the riders were a wind behind them, not always visible, always present in the way men look at their children, when counting becomes the only prayer they know. He will say the Danube that winter was a teacher of pettiness and mercy both. He will talk about ferries and law and too many names for a census taker with a dull stylus. He may even tell you about a battle later near a place called Adrianople, where a Roman army learned the wrong lesson very thoroughly. But that is not tonight's story. Tonight we stand earlier in the long hum, at the river where the riders begin to prefer the Carpathian Basin, the way hedgehogs prefer certain hedges. The Carpathian Basin is a bowl that holds pasture and possibility. Rivers feed it like polite friends bringing dishes to a table. The land rolls, but not unkindly, and the grasses offer long paragraphs of grazing. If you want a capital you can fold and carry, a place to return to that still counts as home, this basin is a good answer. It will serve riders whose logic is seasonal and administrative at once. It will hold a court that can move without losing its shape. It will make Rome nervous because Rome prefers doors to meadows, and meadows do not close at night. Early leaders of this moving court are names that glint in a sentence and then duck back into the tent. Uldine, who appears along the Danube in the years when men still tell the story of Adrianople as a recent embarrassment. Rua or Rugula, whose breath will briefly fog the plans of two empires at once. Oktar, Mansuk. Brothers, uncles, the kind of relations families argue about long after the soup is served. The chroniclers write what they can when they can, and their ink dries faster than certainty. You will hear that Uldin once returned a rebellious Roman's head with the careful manners of man who knows a favour when he performs it. You'll hear that Rua's death, whenever it comes, will open a place where a younger man with a very steady gaze can stand. You will not yet hear the youngest name, the one storytellers love to pronounce slowly because audiences lean toward it like horses toward what water. The tent knows it though. The tent is good at futures. Walk with an envoy. He wears a cloak that smells faintly of oiled leather, and the last inn where the hearth smoked politely rather than efficiently. He has letters with seals, and the seals hold little beasts that were once brave on a banner. He knows how to bow in 4 styles, no more, no less. And when offered a bowl that steams he can drink without making a face that offends, he crosses over by ferry, because a bridge would be too bossy here and a boat is quicker. The rider's camp holds its shape like a map. Children cross and recross the ground between tents as if the earth were a game board, and they have memorised the good squares. Dogs do the work dogs always do. Greet, advise, supervise any food that appears. A translator comes forward with a face that has practised convincing men they understood one another even when they did not. The envoy is handed to hospitality like a parcel, and he becomes an object with obligations and privileges. His first obligation is to warm his hands, his first privilege is to change his mind. You can tell a lot about a court by its cauldrons. These ones are bronze and practical, deep enough to hold a rumour until it softens. Firelight rolls across them like river on stone. A boy skims fat with a ladle that has known better days and keeps choosing more. Men argue about horses. Women argue about dye that refuses to stay bold when washed in certain streams. Someone jokes that the dye in question is little like promises from certain border captains, bright at first, uncertain later. Laughter does the work it always does among people who know they may need to ride together. It polishes the room. The envoy meets a leader. Whether it is Uldine or Rua or another is a matter of which winter you care to imagine. The leader is not alone. No one here is alone when it matters. There are brothers who are not brothers, and cousins who would raise their hands if a stranger tried to insult this man they sometimes argue with. There are men who have learned to place their bows where a child cannot trip them. There is a saddle on a stand that says, in the language of objects, that work happens here quickly when it needs to. The leader receives the envoy with an ease that cities teach and tents refine. He hears the letter, feels the weight of words that sound like coins, and answers in a style that could be called generosity or bargaining, depending on who is telling the story. If you are very lucky, you will witness the moment when two men decide together to avoid trouble because both have seen too much of it. In the weeks that follow, you can stand near a river market that has finally learned to behave. Goods line up like arguments and settle themselves with weighing. Roman coins, solidus, so clean they make even practical men admire for a heartbeat, change hands and pockets and purses. A rider tests a coin with his teeth. This is not science so much as tradition, but sometimes tradition provides an alibi for satisfaction. In return, horses cross the line with the right kind of hooves and with backs that look like they were designed by someone who heard the word endurance and wanted to help. Wool travels, glass beads travel, even jokes travel, which is often a better sign than anyone admits in official reports. There are stories here that will become legends later because legends drink from the old wells. One has to do with a sword in a pasture, found by a shepherd who follows a trickle of blood to its source and discovers a blade sleeping in grass. The elders say the blade belonged to a war god who sometimes lends his tools to people who will keep them busy. The elders say other things too because a good legend is a table with more than one leg. The blade will have a famous owner one day. Tonight it is only a rumour at a quiet fire. It makes the soup taste bolder. Another story worries the governance of luck. How does a confederation keep itself together when so many tongues need translation and so many ambitions need room? The answer wears many names but keeps one face: gifts. Gifts of cloth that look better under a riverlight than in rooms. Gifts of ground for winter and permission to return in spring. Gifts of hostages, named honourably as guests. Rome understands this game as well as any rider, and sometimes better. It sends young men to become polite at the right tents. It receives other young men into schools where rhetoric makes a room purr. Everyone pretends this is only about today. Everyone knows it is about later. The Confederation grows. It is not a kingdom in the way a city man understands kingship. It is a promise repeated in many accents. The Hunnic way of assembling has found its European voice. Chiefs who would once have taken their men to raid without asking anyone now attend to a calendar of musters and winterings. Messengers can move from the Tisa to the Sava, and only need to ask for water when their horses do. The court, such as it is, chooses a place where the grass feels right and the nearby river can be argued with successfully if it floods. The musicians learn how to make a tent sound like the right place to make a treaty, and that is not a small achievement. If you look for war, you will miss the point. There are raids, yes, the kind that make officials rearrange their schedules and mothers practice counting again aloud to calm their hearts. But mostly there is logistics. Mostly there are grain stores and salt in the arithmetic of winter. Men with bows do not ride far without bread that tries to be crusty even when conditions are against crust. Horses do not thrive on strategy, they thrive on hay. If you want to imagine the European Huns honestly, picture a spoon, a stack of hay, and a saddle with a secret compartment where a man keeps the only knife that can fix his harness properly. Glory visits sometimes. Competence lives here. Roman authors say the Huns were ugly and terrible because enemies always are in the telling. You stand by the river and see the hands that mend, the shoulders that carry water as if it were a vote, the eyes that look to the weather and not to the mirror. A small boy loses a bone toggle and spends a morning looking for it, learning in the process how to read a ground that holds too many answers. An old woman weaves a band with little mountains on it, even though she has never seen a mountain up close. Someone told her they make a horizon behave. A horse stumbles and a man places his hand on the shoulder, waits with the animal's patience, and then eases it forward step by step. Empire is in such moments too, especially when an empire is portable. There are meetings that matter because decisions are made, and meetings that matter because the room is better afterwards. One winter, a gathering near the Tisa becomes the second kind. Chiefs from far arrive not for a fight but for a list. They sit on cushions that tried to be dry on the way in and failed happily. They eat stew that tastes like agreement. They share news about Roman generals who prefer certain kinds of gifts, and about gates where the guard dog is friendlier than the guard. They decide nothing that an analyst would bother to write, and yet if you step back you can see 10 paths that will now be walked together instead of in circles. You can feel the trust that comes when men remember one another's children's names without needing to look at a slip of wood. The basin becomes a classroom for the Confederation's children. They learn the trick of staying up late when messages need to be carried, and sleeping midday when the horses will not mind feet near their hooves. They learn a few words of Latin, because it is useful to know when a man is trying to charge you for a second time. They learn to count without fingers in case a man asks you to count while you are holding something important and hot. They learn that rumour moves like smoke and that the first person to feed it meat is often the person it will be kindest to later. Roman coins keep arriving. Usually they come in bags with sensible knots and terrible whacks. They smell of oil and travel and a great many hands. Some go straight into the cauldron's decisions. Others become ornaments on the belts that announce a man's place in a room. A few are pierced and made into pendants for children. Not because children care, but because mothers like to pin wealth to the safest thing in the world. Alongside coins travel mistakes, miscopied names, maps where the river makes a left it refuses to make in reality, promises made by men who will not be present when the bill is presented. The riders learn a kind of patience that city men mistake for insolence, and that horses understand immediately. If you are still by the fire, the kettle would like to offer you a joke. The joke is gentle and has to do with envoys and their shoes. Roman shoes make a sound on frozen ground that is nearly an opinion. Rider boots make no sound but keep secrets in the way laces are tied. The joke ends with a mule watching both and making a face like a clerk who does not enjoy an unscheduled meeting. You laugh as much out of gratitude as amusement. Gratitude because the night is easy and the stew has agreed not to be complicated, and because it is possible, for once, to imagine a winter without mischief. Legends do not only live in the east with shepherds and swords. There is another, about a river that rises at night to move a boat without oars because it dislikes waste. The boat belongs to a trader who fell asleep mid-delivery. The river nudged him to his pier, set the rope where his wife could see it, and went back to being water, which is a lot of work already. People tell the story to remind themselves that sometimes the world helps those who are useful. They also tell it because rivers like to be thanked. You will notice that after this tale is told, a little extra wine is poured into the river, with the polite insincerity humans reserve for gods and old friends. By the end of our first night by the Danube, you have learned the essential thing people forget about the European Huns. They are not a tempest looking for a city to ruin. They are a habit of assembling, a method of moving, a talent for making a confederation feel like a hearth. They prefer competent neighbours to dramatic ones. They respect walls that do their jobs and gates that admit they are also doors. They will fight when the arithmetic requires it. They will trade when arithmetic smiles on trade. They carry their state in many saddlebags. Bow, kettle, ledger of promises, stories that glue strangers into cousins. You will also have noticed something about the light. Roman beacons speak in verbs. Come, watch, warn. Rider fires speak in nouns. Bread, horse, bowl. When the wind drops, the verbs and nouns make a sentence together. It is not perfect grammar. It is good enough to keep people alive through a season. That is usually what grammar is for. Morning will bring a more forward name to the tent. There will be two brothers at first, co-rulers who decide what to do with a river that has opinions and a court with many voices. Later there will be one, and his gaze will be the kind of quiet that makes noise forget itself. Rumours will fatten into campaigns and treaties. The drum at walk tempo will sometimes have to keep a canter. For now, let the river argue softly with its stones. Let the felt keep the night at a respectful distance. Let the bow hang where a careless guest won't snag it. Let the kettle do what kettles have done in every part of the world that survived winter. Hum, and then hum again, and invite whoever hears it to come closer and be reasonable. If you step outside the tent one last time, the Riverlights have thinned to a few patient embers on the Roman side and a handful of stubborn stars caught in water on the riders' side. Frost makes small democracies of the weeds. A horse ripples its skin and resettles, a movement so efficient you understand why men put their hopes on such backs. Somewhere, a messenger reviewing his route under his breath pauses, listens to an owl and takes it as a favourable vote. You do the same. The basin keeps its gentle bowl shape around you. The knight tends the fire like a partner who knows this marriage has lasted because both sides learned to be generous. Come back to the kettle, taste the last of the broth, feel the wool at your shoulders and the honest weight of sleep in your eyes. The Danube is still moving, which is a comfort. So are the stories. Tomorrow we will meet brothers who rule together, and we will carry their names properly on our tongues. For now, keep the sound of water so the road has something to follow. Keep the glow of Riverlights so the map does not feel lonely. Keep the simple proof of the tent, a home that can be folded, so you remember what kind of empire you're meeting. When you close your eyes, the hoofbeats will move to the edge of hearing the way it rains on a far roof. That is not danger. That is time, walking. Sleep then, the river takes no offence, the camp does not mind. The stars continue their shift without complaining about hours. In the morning there will be bread, and a man who knows the right kind of joke to begin negotiation, and a horse who imagines himself taller than he is, and finds to his delight that he is exactly tall enough. There will be news from the south written in ink still wet at the edges. There will be a private rumour about a ring on a hand that should not be offering rings. There will be a cauldron that remembers the story about the god's sword and smiles in bronze, but that is later. Tonight belongs to the river and to the first fires, and to you, warming your hands, and to the road that has just learned our names. Morning does not so much arrive as unroll, like a length of wool taken from a chest and shaken once for the day. The basin smells of damp grass and yesterday's fire. Somewhere a horse stamps in a way that means patience. Somewhere a dog decides the first task is to inspect a ladle. The river keeps its voice low, pleased to discover that its banks are still where it left them. You wake into a camp that remembers your name, and that is the first luxury any government can offer. There is bread from the last baking and a promise to bake again. There is a bow asleep in its case that will speak when spoken to. There is a seat near the kettle, which is to say there is policy. Between the fires, men are already walking with the alert slowness of people who carry schedules in their heads instead of their hands. A boy trots past, counting under his breath. Somewhere he has been told that numbers are a kind of animal you can tame if you feed them daily. Two older messengers have their horses' girths in a respectful grip and their minds on the shape of the road. A woman reties the felt flap so it behaves when the wind decides to practice grammar. This is what a confederation looks like when it is not making news. It looks like competence. Word has gone around, soft at first, then with the cheerless clarity of settled fact that the older ruler is gone. Rua, Rugila to some tongues, has stepped out of the room in the way winter sometimes steps out of a winter, quietly leaving both gratitude and a draft. The court does not panic. It seldom does, because panic is the luxury of people whose food is someone else's worry. Instead, the court does the obvious thing that cities often forget how to do. It keeps going. The gifts are still due, the horses still need their hay counted. The envoys, who do not travel cheap, are already on the road. Out of this day's ordinary work, a pair of brothers move forward and take up the centre, as if it were a saddle. They have been warming with their thoughts for years. Attila and Bleeder. Their names carry different syllables in different mouths. Their work will share a spine. They do not make a speech. They do not need to. Men know where to stand by watching where the dogs choose to lie. And today the dogs choose to lie where these two men plan to sit. That is politics on the grass. If you walk with them a while, what you notice first is not grandeur but division of labour. They do not both ride to the same meeting unless the meeting requires two lights to make the shadows behave. One takes the west paths more often, informing himself about the temper of men who live near the Danube bends and the limes with their talkative towers. The other turns his reins toward the east and the longer benches of grass, where allies and rivals speak words that are not Latin, and not quite the same words they were last year. They return to camp and their councils cross like streams that have been neighbours all their lives. Decisions become obvious because the alternatives have been ridden. Under their watch, the court breathes in, a way you can measure with a hand laid on the tent wall. The pulse is steady, the work distributes. Men who thought themselves purely brave discover the pleasures of being useful. Chiefs who once counted their prestige in copper mounts learn a new arithmetic that includes reliable winter pasture and the honour of being assigned to show a Roman envoy where the good bread is sold. There is laughter again, the kind that sits low in the voice and does not spill. It means the stew is adequate and the weather can be spoken well of without irony. It also means the gifts are flowing on time. Gifts are the bloodstream of this body. Silk does its soft diplomacy across the river. Horses do their harder diplomacy back. Coins arrive in fat bags tied by careful clerks who imagine that good knots can improve an argument. The bags are opened in tents, not palaces. The coins sleep overnight on folded cloth as if they were guests and not punctuation. In the morning they become promises, parcelled out in bowls and saddle pouches, pegged to names that are pegged to other names all the way down to the man who carries the last load of wood and should not be expected to do it for poetry. This is not romance, it is administration, which is romance's quiet older sister, the one who remembers birthdays. To the south, in rooms built to make voices carry, men in heavy robes decide what to call what they are doing. The word they choose is treaty, and the place they choose to write it down is Margus, a town where walls get to prove to themselves that they remember how to be courteous. The year is placed by historians later, because years are things historians love to place, but for the men at the table it is simply this season, this negotiation, this soup. The treaty is not a mystery story, it has the usual bones. There will be peace at a price that can be paid in gold and horseflesh and in the polite setting aside of certain quarrels that, like coughs, do not disappear but can be persuaded to wait. There will be markets designated and hostages exchanged in the noble style. That means a boy will learn in an expensive school why his father trusted a boarder more than an oath. There will be envoys with better shoes than their budget suggests. And there will be interpreters who have perfected the art of removing thorns from sentences. From the rider's side of the table, the treaty tastes like a sensible stew. It thickens the thin parts of winter. It buys certainty in a currency men can actually use. It lets the Confederation promise its allies things that are both pleasant and real. Grazing in a particular meander of river, iron in a particular quantity, a share of whatever a raid brings back if a raid must be conducted when arithmetic grows rude again. It also buys time, and time is what you spend if you plan to live a long while in one place without admitting you have set down roots. A man can be proud and still take time in trade. A horse certainly would. From the Roman side, the treaty is the polite version of admitting the obvious. Out beyond the watchtowers is a government with tents for walls that can move faster than any revised memo. It can arrive where the Danube would like it not to arrive, and negotiate with weather better than any general who slept his youth on stone floors. It will not be made to vanish by adjectives. Better then to pay for the privilege of calling one's own quiet, to double the annuities when needed, to open markets where men can haggle instead of bleed, to take boys as honoured guests and send them home as men who know your best baker. Pride is expensive, coin is cheaper. Even emperors can count when the season requires it. After Margus, the camp feels as if someone has put fresh straw under every sleeping mat. Men walk with the same names but different shoulders. The brother's court hums and does not wobble. You see it in small proofs. A saddle stand gets repaired before it complains. A horse string is rotated cleverly, so none of the animals develop that tired look that makes a rider lie to everyone, including himself. A cook receives a bundle of millet from a southern friend and decides to prove a point about patience to men who thought porridge had no future. At a council, 3 chiefs argue about a hill that only one of them has actually seen, and still they reach agreement, because maps exist in songs and shoulders here, not only on paper. Sometimes you get to watch the brothers in their different rooms. Bleda sits among men who have stories about the east wind, and they laugh in the clean part of the night and then listen to the wind itself to check their jokes for accuracy. He has a way of lifting his chin at a sentence he wants repeated. Men begin repeating the sentence before he asks. He hunts when a hunt will make a point without writing it on anyone's skin. He likes those evenings when the felt walls breathe slowly, and a guest looks down to discover he has eaten enough and needs only to be told so. Attila, in another tent, sits at a table that keeps forgetting it is a table, and remembers only that it is steady. He watches men who believe they are hiding what they feel and lets them finish hiding. He has an economy of gesture that instructs a room in thrift without embarrassing anyone. When he laughs, the sound is not a performance. It is the sound a knot makes when it has been untied correctly. The court's treasures are not kept as relics, they are kept as tools with good manners. Among the things brought to table now and then is a blade with a history that walks into a room before the blade does. Some call it the sword of a war god, found by a shepherd who followed a line of blood across a field that had no business bleeding. Others say it was a good sword left in a bad place and that gods get too much credit when men cannot be bothered to remember. Either way, the story refuses to leave. Men tell it as an omen because omens convince people to behave themselves in public. Women tell it as a reminder that a pasture will give back what it takes if you are patient and you look. The sword sits in the tent like a guest from a neighbouring village who has brought excellent cheese. It is allowed to be impressive and then asked politely not to make a fuss. Practicalities crowd back in. A letter arrives from the south with a seal that got overexcited on the way and stuck itself to the wrong edge. It explains, in the language of men who do not ride, that certain markets will open and certain roads will be guarded, and that a certain bishop has complicated his afterlife by breaking promises. Rumour is already ahead of the letter. Rumour says a holy man in a border town pushed his luck through a door and discovered it was locked on the inside. Rumour says he fled to the riders and now speaks prettily about justice. Rumour says a gate that has always been closed on time decided once to be merely late. How much is true will be sorted later. For now, the rumour proves a general point that both brothers know without being told. The world is full of guests who arrive without invitation and change the seating chart. Hostages, which is to say honoured guests under supervision, come and go as the treaty prescribes. Boys with careful hair learn how to hold a cup by the part that doesn't reveal nervousness. They learn words for horse parts that never came up in the fine schools, and discover the pleasure of being competent at something that mattered before the alphabet did. Some go home later with admirable posture and stories that will make them useful to men who fear only what they do not understand. A few choose to stay as long as their nerves can stand the responsibility, because tents are honest with you in a way that marble is not. If you sleep badly, the tent admits it heard you. Marble does not listen. Marble was born certain. Feasts in the brothers' time have a rhythm that will later be described by a man with a tidy beard and a love of words, but you do not need his account to see the shape of an evening now. Men sit on long benches according to a logic that changes less than politics wants you to think. Meat arrives in amounts that suggest an argument was settled earlier in favour of generosity. Cups go around, and the joke is that they go faster among men who would insist they dislike jokes. The good dishes shine because someone bothered to polish them, and you can always tell when craftspeople were taken seriously because the room arranges itself to show their work. In the midst of this, one of the brothers prefers a wooden cup when a golden one is offered, not to embarrass anyone, but to remind everyone that a drink is a drink and not a negotiation. People remember that because such memory costs nothing and pays on time. Between feasts, dispatches, messengers leave with sentences memorized so thoroughly they could deliver them while their horse decided to dance. They carry small parcels tied with skeins of wool that once served another purpose and will serve another after this. They ride through country that knows the feel of hooves and the cadence of men who ride for duty, not drama. The relay points are tents, not towers. A grandmother at one such place has become as famous in her family as any general. She can make a pot of something warm in the time it takes a rider to deliver news about a road that did not yet exist yesterday, and already exists enough to be used. This, the brothers know, is what winning feels like in years when winning is a verb, the right people at the right fires offering the right bowls at the right moment. Occasionally the treaty's grammar slips. A raid happens the way a hiccup happens to a well-fed man. Someone on the Roman side calculates poorly and tells a rider no because he has forgotten that the rider has a cousin who can turn that no into a maybe before dusk. Someone on the rider's side indulges a very old itch and wakes up to discover that arithmetic has already notified the brothers. Corrections follow. Gifts are added to lists that were not supposed to require additions. Chiefs apologise while maintaining the dignity of men who still own their horses. It is irritating and survivable. Like rain at a wedding, everyone agrees should have been held under a roof. In the quieter months, Bleeder will ride to a group that has been useful and be useful back. He will offer a path to winter water, and the promise that the men who use it will be remembered by name the next time the bags of coin are untied. Attila will sit with men who have learned to keep their faces calm, even when the soup surprises them. He will say almost nothing, and by saying almost nothing he will rearrange an afternoon. When the discussion is over, a plan will exist where only agitation existed before. He will ride out later and test whether the plan can stand up to mud. If it cannot, he will not shout at the mud. The seasons keep the drumbeat and the basin keeps the rhythm. Somewhere along the Sava, a new market acts like an old truce and works. In a bend of the Tisa, a friend of the court puts up a fence that is less about property than about reminding a herd to remember itself. Across the Danube, a governor writes home that the barbarians have manners, which was not the expected complaint, and that the river has opinions, which everyone already knew. Men with pens decide to argue about titles. Letters use words like king and not king, and leader of many rather than leader of one. The tent shrugs in its clothway and continues to be itself. Names are for outside, inside everyone knows who gets handed the bowl first. There is talk occasionally of what comes after two brothers. Men talk in tents because they do not like to be surprised by succession. They speak of sons who are already practicing walking like people who will be observed. They speak of uncles whose loyalty is as sturdy as a good rope. They speak of cousins who would like to be left out of any plan that involves shouting. The talk is not treason. It is the same thing the women talk about when they measure out thread at a long table and make sure it will reach the end of the cloth. A people who move must be better at continuity than a people who live in a palace. Palaces can rely on walls to keep a shape while a family sorts itself out. Tents rely on the understanding that the shape is the people, and the people must be ready tomorrow. The treaty needs renewing at intervals because men age and the world enjoys reminding them. Margus is remembered, then revisited in spirit, if not in exact place, because paperwork, like stew, benefits from stirring. The sums change, the markets expand. The list of hostages becomes a roster of acquaintances, which is the most useful kind of list any frontier ever invents. Now and then a bishop again complicates things by being a man first and a function second, and in those moments even the patient find themselves relacing boots with a tighter pull. But the structure holds. It holds because two brothers keep behaving like the same promise spoken with different voices. In evenings, when the wind is too interested in other matters to be a nuisance, the storytellers choose rumours the way cooks choose herbs. One rumour has to do with a ring and a letter that will travel farther than its sender anticipated. It is the kind of rumour that makes women exchange glances across a room and men pretend not to notice that they noticed. Another rumour has to do with a Western general who collects allies the way good hosts collect extra spoons, and who will one day decide to test the riders on a field where dust writes the first draft of the story. These rumours are not yet history, but they are behaving like plans that have learned to stand up without wobbling. The brothers hear them and do not chase them. They make sure the bags are ready, the horses are sound, the envoys can deliver the sentence in one breath, and the cooks have a second ladle. By the time another winter sits down without asking, the court has learned new habits that feel old. The boys sent south return with better Latin and worse patience. The boys sent north return with better horses and an appetite for meat that makes their mothers proud and slightly weary. Men who were certain the world could only be understood inside a wall have discovered that walls understand very little of the things that matter most. Men who were certain the world could only be understood on a horse have discovered that there is a strange pleasure in a punctual gait, and a scale that balances when you ask it nicely. These are human improvements dressed up as politics. They matter because they persist. Somewhere beyond the line of trees a funeral happens, and it is the sort of funeral that allows both tears and arithmetic. A man important to the brothers has died at the correct time for him, and an inconvenient time for them. The camp does what it always does: gathers, feeds, organises, remembers. A child asks whether the dead eat. A patient aunt answers that the dead eat whatever the living are generous enough to share, which is why the living should not be stingy. Later men finish counting something and discover that they feel better. There is a lesson there that the court has already absorbed, and then on a day that pretends it is ordinary, a note of silence enters the camp that is not ordinary. Bleda vanishes from the daily grammar of tents and roads. In some tellings it is a clean story, quick and grim. In others it is a slow evening of illness that took advantage of a man too busy to notice it arriving. Later chroniclers will confidently install a dagger in the gap and assign it to Attila's shadow. The tent will not agree to this without the usual caveats. Tents have learned to live with uncertainty and prefer to introduce it like a polite creditor. What is certain is that the court shifts its weight and does not fall. Men lower their voices, not because they are guilty, but because the heir has asked for courtesy. The next morning the dogs lie where one man sits. That is succession by breath. Attila does not suddenly become a different person because stories would prefer he do so. He becomes more obviously the person he had been when another person shared the work. The court's rhythm does not accelerate, it clarifies. The wooden cup continues to be preferred on evenings when gold is on parade. The dispatch riders leave with the same uncomplicated determination to arrive before their horses grow bored. The gifts are distributed with the same seriousness that would make a miser weep and a generous man nod in approval. The difference is not in the tasks. It is in the way men watch the doorway while they talk, hoping to see his silhouette. When they see it, they remember how to finish their sentences. Rumour, never idle, invents reasons and then tests them against the weak. It suggests that a war god's sword does not like in 2 hands on its hilt. It suggests that brothers are like horses, splendid side by side in a field, less so inside a harness. It suggests that winter had an opinion and expressed it. The court listens, tolerates, files. The camp eats, the horses breathe. A singer sings a song where a river chooses one bank for a year and promises the other bank its turn next time. In that song, the river keeps its promise. In life, promises are kept by people who tie knots correctly and ladle stew evenly and do not boast about either. After a while, no one feels obliged to explain the past. Shared work fills the days. New markets open like flowers without arguing about the season printed on the calendar. The Roman governor in a certain town makes it to the end of a difficult year, with his hair unpunished, and his accounts only slightly embarrassed. He writes to his cousin that the Huns are terrifying and reasonable, which is the most accurate sentence he has written in months. He has learned to enjoy the sight of a felt tent from the safe distance of a gate. The tent, for its part, has learned to enjoy the sight of a gate that opens on time. Civilization is sometimes nothing more than this exchange of preferences. Attila now rides a little more and speaks a little less. The speech he does give is modest in length and extravagant in effect. Men say afterwards that they had intended to suggest this or that point, but discovered themselves agreeing with whatever had just been observed. He does not flatter craft, he expects it. The bowyers keep their glue at the right temperature because they do not wish to be the subject of one of his quiet looks. The horse handlers rotate strings before old injuries remember how to complain. The singers tune their instruments in a way that respects both the mood of the room and the appetite of the stew. It is not fear. Fear would change the sound. This is obligation at its best, which is to say love that refuses to blush. Night comes early on certain days in the basin, and you learn to use the dark as a kind of furniture. The court does not end when the sun leaves. It relaxes into the glow. A youth who's been practicing writing names on birch and not breaking the bark by pressing too hard now finds himself taking down words that matter. He breathes and remembers to dip his brush only as often as necessary. An older man with scars in appropriate places and none in the wrong ones begins teaching a city-born hostage how to sit a horse so both horse and boy are less offended. Across the way, a woman teaches another woman a stitch that will make a seam understand its responsibilities. All of these are the business of a state. None of them look dramatic on a map. Over the river, an emperor considers whether peace or thunder will buy him more time. He has advisors who count and advisors who imagine, and he knows he needs both, though he is not always patient about it. He leans on tables and the windowsills and the arms of chairs and finds that everything he leans on wishes to advise him back. The Danube advises patience, the courts advise expenditure, the soldier in him advises risk, the father in him advises sleep. He sleeps poorly and writes neat notes in the morning to compensate. He has a feeling that the next years will ask him to be brave in a way that is modern, which is to say, brave and also clever with supplies. He is not wrong. As the park closes, listen to the court's evening. It is not sad, it is not celebratory, it is satisfied, which is a rarer thing. The kettle hums as kettles do when they approve. The felt smells faintly of smoke and milk, which is the smell of a life you can defend. A horse in the shadows delivers the long sigh of an animal who has decided it is agreeable to be near people again tomorrow. Somewhere a cup that is not gold makes its low, honest sound against a table that has remembered to be steady. Attila speaks softly to a man who will carry a message farther than any rumour can travel, and the man nods because he has been waiting all day to be useful in this precise way. The river wears its lights like a bracelet that has learned to move without clinking. Tomorrow the arithmetic will change its tone and maps will begin to behave like drums instead of rugs. The brothers will no longer share the centre, and one voice will have to carry farther. Treaties will be tested not because they were insincere, but because winters have their own treaties with hunger and ambition. There will be embassies that bring more than compliments and tables that receive more than dinners. There will be roads to the south and to the east, and to the thought in a Western general's head that says a field can be a sentence with an ending he chooses. But that is for another night. For now, you step outside and let the air braid your hair into the shape of attention. The stars have decided not to change their position simply because men do, which is their contribution to politics. The camp listens to itself and, satisfied with the listening, settles. You carry the feel of this part of the story in your hands like a bowl you mean to refill soon. You remember the brothers as a rhythm learned quickly and a habit learned slowly. You think about a sword that is either divine or excellent, and about a treaty that is either cynical or wise, and about a wooden cup that is either humble or correct. You decide you can sleep with any of those interpretations and still wake in a world you recognize. Sleep then while the basin holds its breath between promises. The kettle will guard the coals, the horse will remember the route, the tent will breathe the way a chest breathes when it is certain it can afford tomorrow. In the next chapter, bootprints will learn to overlap the scratches of siege ladders, and the river will be asked to judge between hunger and resolve. For tonight, you have learned how two brothers made a centre, and how one man kept it steady. That is enough for the length of a darkness. The year turns its page without ceremony. A thin skin of ice rims the reed-choked bends, then lifts and drifts like torn parchment. The basin exhales into the Balkans, and the Balkans answer with their old road smell of stone dust and olive smoke. You wake to the same camp as last night and the same river, with its patient shoulders, yet something in the air has moved from waiting to walking. Men speak the names of crossings with the same tone they use for cousins they'll see soon. Horses listen and lower their heads to the hay, as if approving an itinerary. No trumpet declares it. The work is quieter than that. Runners leave with sentences that will wade the way coin is weighed. Grooms gather the strings of horses that will pull carts and that will simply accompany carts to correct their posture when the road tries to teach bad habits. Bow cases are inspected by fingers that know the difference between dry and ready. A woman ties a knot in her husband's cloak and unties it again until it agrees to be the kind that releases when pulled by a cold hand. A boy fetches wax for seals and enjoys the tiny warmth on his thumb. Everyone is sure of one thing: the South will need a conversation. When men later call these seasons campaigns, they'll misplace where the courage lives. It isn't in the moments that draw paintings. It is here, in the decision to leave when the grass says leave, not when pride does. Attila sits in a light that makes the lines beside his eyes look like they were put there by a careful carver. He does not announce a plan. He has ridden enough roads this year that men can hear the plan without a speech. He speaks with a finger to a map that is mostly memory and says 3 words that are not dramatic at all and move 1,000 hooves. Not too soon. South of the river, the empire that writes in Greek and thinks in Roman prose rearranges its furniture to accommodate the thought of riders. Letters are composed with that refined haste only cities can manage. A clerk copies the text into a cleaner hand. Another adds a ribbon with an optimism that makes the room more bearable. The ink dries while wax softens on a brazier and then seals, because at some point language must agree to be heavy. Boys are sent to the walls to count things. Men with titles measure out confidence to place in the corridors. Above the city roofs, crows gather to audit the squares where bread will be argued about later. Rumour pretends to be late and arrives early. It runs ahead of anything on hooves. It speaks of bridges that are really boats, and of boats that are really arguments with water. It speaks of roads through low hills where the frost has the courtesy to reveal stone before it trips a cart. It speaks of the Danube as a teacher that will examine anyone who tries to cross it, a fair teacher, strict and a little fond of showmanship. It speaks of the Sava and the Morava as friends you must flatter in different ways, one with patience, one with rails of willow laid under wheel. The rumour also mentions weather, because weather believes it belongs on every council. Men nod when they hear it. Women fold extra cloth without being asked. Morning sets out with the column and settles into its usual business of making each step look like the only possible one. The riders move the way water chooses, with a courtesy to the slope that is not submission, but wisdom. Where roads exist, they use them. Where roads pretend not to exist, they draw them with hooves. A cart axle complains exactly once before a blacksmith persuades it to try gratitude. Afterwards, the axle behaves as if it had intended to be reasonable all along. A span of river is taken seriously. The bank is tested with a spear butt. The sound tells you more than colour ever will. A man in the shallows draws a line with his heel. The column passes, the river holds, and a quiet cheer releases from the backs of horses like steam when lids are lifted. There are towns ahead that have practiced being useful for centuries. Their walls have learned to be courtesies rather than absolute negations. A priest in one such place makes the sign that calms him and keeps his voice in the correct register. He reminds himself that the riders buy salt as readily as anyone, and that the people of his town prefer a dull market to a lively raid. He has a barrel set near the gate with cups that clink even when they are empty. The gate is told to open, not as surrender, but as welcome to a transaction older than anyone's flag. Men from the escort watch with wary faces and warmed hands. People measure each other with eyes that know how much to imagine and how much to accept. Some gates delay. Someone inside wants to see what a day longer will buy. A day longer buys windburn and unhelpful pride. A plank goes down across a ditch and men look at the plank as if it were a question and choose to answer it softly. The plank holds. The ditch admits it is outnumbered by determination. It isn't glamorous, it feels correct. You cross. The men on the wall change the angle of their shoulders and lean into being sensible. Later they may tell a version where their courage was tested. It was, in the quiet way courage likes to be tested when it intends to last. News of what happens in each place reaches the next place, as news always does when it can travel by mouth. This is not the news that comes written on vellum with admirable spelling. This is the news that mentions whose dogs will bark and still wag, which baker subtracts less weight from your bread to pay himself, which captain pretends to be deaf to the sound of coin. This is the news that keeps men alive without making a habit of revenge. Attila listens to such news with the exact attention he gives to the count of arrows. He arranges to arrive where arrival will make sense. He leaves where leaving will look like generosity. He is not interested in making enemies who last longer than his patience. While the riders move, the court to the south practices its own movements. An emperor who has learned to lean on counsel leans again. He has a sister who thinks like a ledger and a general who thinks like a weather vane with muscles. He has lawyers who remind him that words can do work if you pay them with caution. He has bishops who remind him that God dislikes waste even in policy. He looks at the eastern walls and loves them the way a gardener loves an old fruit tree. With pride, with a memory of what they cost, with a clear understanding that they cannot water themselves. He asks for sums, and the sums answer as sums do, with the sound of a door that considers opening and opens because it knows it will be opened anyway. Coin is stacked in rooms that know what to do with coin. It will be moved in carts under blankets that once protected theatrical costumes. It will leave the city in daylight, because secrecy is expensive and daylight is honest. One winter in this sequence, the ground itself decides to change the script. Far to the south, the earth shrugs in a way that makes skilled men drop their tools and breathe a name they haven't spoken in years. Stones that trusted one another's weight forget their agreement. Walls that stood like terms in a sentence stagger and ask for a pause. The city shakes and then settles, counting itself. Bread lines smooth out again after a day or two, because bread is righteous when it is warm. But corners crack, and where corners crack, men with steady faces allow their hearts to argue for thicker payments to men beyond the river. They call it prudence. It is. The word from the shaken places travels as fast as anything on 4 legs or 3 masts. In the rider camps, men and women hear it without rejoicing. It is not joy to learn that a wall was troubled. It is merely information. Attila adjusts his pace without changing his posture. He does not need omens when he has carpenters who report where a ladder will lean true. He does not pretend the gods have favoured him with a private girding. He expects the gods to favour work and the keeping of promises. He keeps his, mostly by making sure the promises he makes are exactly as large as his capacity. A crossing near a town with a name like a drum presents itself as a riddle. The river there is not large, but it is cunning. It has eaten things before. Men throw brush into certain places and watch how the current chews. They choose differently by the time they are prepared to step. A raft of planks refuses to call itself a bridge, and yet performs like one when asked politely. The first horses go over with ears flicking. One looks surprised to find itself on the other bank. Another looks bored, and therefore professional. The men who follow find their breath again in their chests where breath should live, and thank whichever small god supervises the amateur carpenter. Down the road, a basilica becomes a warehouse because rooms exist to hold what people need them to hold. The men who made it holy approve of the new use because it will give them a name to lean on when they make their case to heaven later. Sacks of grain go in and come out. Salt arrives in tidy bricks that taste like everything that will not spoil. There is a ledger. A child is permitted to make the simple marks that mean full and empty. The child is bored and then pleased, as all good apprentices are in the first half hour of learning competence. If a priest worries, he does so in private and eats his supper with grateful hands. The confrontation that cities expect, lines across a field, speeches to the sky, does not arrive. Something else does. Call it conversation. Call it a steady argument in measured steps. The riders do not vanish, they adjust pressure. They take depots in a way that makes future carts find they have no reason to stop where they had intended. They prick the map with neat pins that puncture the routes by which an army breathes. The Eastern Command discovers that it is possible to possess a city and still be short of places to put your feet. It is not humiliation. It is arithmetic. Arithmetic is less entertaining than an insult, but arithmetic will outlast any windbag. Between movements, envoys go and come with that professional expression that makes men feel civilization has occurred. In Attila's tent, the envoys are kept warm and not made to wait longer than is useful. Their letters are respected because letters are the polite fiction by which men spare each other, carrying responsibilities in their own mouths. The wax seal is untied with the tenderness you would give a knot your mother made. The words are weighed, not because of their poetry, but because of their charges. So many silidi per year, so many hostages, so many markets designated, so many wrongs forgiven by mutual agreement, and then remembered privately in case future leverage needs seasoning. There is an evening when a famous letter is placed in a famous hand. It says, in its careful voice, that tribute must be increased to numbers which the bean counters later remember and schoolchildren later ignore. It says the price of quiet has gone up. It says this not with gloating, but with the solid kindness of a merchant who wants the deal to remain a deal. Across the sea of roofs, a council reads the letter aloud and then no one speaks immediately, not because they are shocked, but because shamness is the last luxury of power, to be quiet while you afford it. Then men begin to speak, and they speak exactly as long as competence permits. In the end, coin moves. It always does when the lesson is well taught. Nothing in the riders' camp changes colour to celebrate. The stew is no richer than yesterday. Men still have to mend straps at night. A cart still insists on walking like a drunk until a boy discovers the pebble that has been interviewing the wheel all day. But something deep relaxes. Winter looks a degree less clever. Women begin to plan the dyeing of certain cloths with less guarded joy. Horses graze with that satisfied sway horses have when tomorrow will not ask them to lie about their endurance. Attila sleeps ordinary sleep, which is the best kind a leader has any right to request. If he dreams, he keeps it to himself, the way a good courier keeps a message inside a fold of calm. There are places where the roads cut low between hills, and the sound of hooves and wheels turns the air into a drum. In such places rumour grows theatrical. It produces the story of a saint who appeared on a wall and persuaded a ladder to find itself too short. It produces the story of a Roman general who put on a servant's cloak and listened to his own soldiers complain and decided the world would be kinder with better soup. It produces the story of a rider who could smell a ford a mile off like a fisherman smells rain. All of these are serviceable fictions. They are told to give people permission to behave in the better ways they already knew. On a late afternoon that the wind would like to own, the column pauses at a marsh that occupies the next hour like a bureaucrat. The reeds hold their breath in narrow green. A frog makes a suggestion and then regrets it. Men consult one another with glances, because glances do not waste the day. The path is found by the lightest horses first, guided by a woman who remembers the weight of the water there from a summer when the mosquitoes were braver. The path holds. The wagons try on humility and discover it suits them. There is laughter at the end that spreads back through the carts like a rumour that makes everyone taller. Somewhere behind you, a small city decides not to remember you. It closes its gate with the aching slowness of wood that has learned to be important. Inside, a woman explains to her child that the world is not safer because the gate is shut. It is safer because the people inside have chosen to be kind to one another while the day is still young. A man who used to be a soldier takes up a sweeping broom with the exact care he used to give a spear. This is victory too, though it's not the kind anyone writes inscriptions for. The steps of this season add up, and the numbers are written, not on marble, but in the way the empire south of the river begins to budget its peace. Coin is promised to arrive not on holidays, but on schedules. Markets are planned like festivals that learn to behave. Hostages are named in advance and treated with the respect owed to boys who might someday hold the pen that signs your safety. There are quarrels, of course. There is a bishop who walks out of a meeting because he cannot swallow the idea that coin can be holy if it is properly employed. He returns the next day and uses the coin to feed the poor, and in his own stern way admits he was taught something by men on horses he does not care to admire. It is tempting to tell you the riders returned north with the glitter of plunder. The truth is a finer glitter. They returned with a timetable. They returned with the memory of which gates open like good ideas and which open like beds at the end of a necessary day. They returned with songs that remembered the taste of olives and the way certain rivers smell when they are bored. They returned with a more precise understanding of what the South will pay to keep its walls untested. This is not romance, though it looks like fortune if you stack the results on a mat and admire them. It is the math of breathing. Inevitably, someone asks whether any of this travel has made Attila a different man. The camp shrugs its felt shrug and says he was already the man who could count heartbeats at the speed of horses. It says he has learned a few new silences, the kind that let other men hear their own good ideas and call them orders. It says he does not apologise to Rhodes for using them well. It says he returns to camp and makes sure the dogs have bones in the correct proportions to their self-respect. It says he listens to old women tell him which knots have been failing lately and why. If this disappoints anyone who wanted omens, that is their error. The metronome makes no music. It makes all music possible. There is a night before the next crossing, when the wind accepts the camp as a reasonable arrangement and goes to bother trees elsewhere. In that quiet, men tell a rumour that makes everyone stop fussing with their gear and listen. The rumour is that a letter has travelled from a palace in the west, a letter tied to a ring that was not meant for any finger on a horse. It says a name that glows like a coal under ash, a woman who lives in rooms that never run out of curtains. The rumour says the letter asks a question that is really a lever. No one knows whether it is true. They smile in the way men do when a story promises new roads. Then they go to sleep, because roads are kinder to the well-rested. Morning resumes its profession. The carts sing their simple song. A spear point as thin as a reed catalogues the bottom of a stream and decides against drama. The column splits when it suits the day and rejoins when it suits the night. South dispatches reach a court that has decided to claim victory in the way cities prefer to, by surviving with receipts. The Emperor signs a document that will make future analysts call this the year tribute changed shape. He does not feel triumphant. He feels relieved and a little restless, which is to say he is still alive. A season like this has a way of teaching everyone how to be bored politely. The best soldiers learn to love the problem of mud. The best officials learn to love the problem of numbers. The best priests learn to love the problem of keeping people's hands busy when their minds want to run into the field and perform. Boredom is underrated in empires that wish to last. It is the brown paper that protects the silver. At last the basin's pull becomes noticeable, as homes always pull on men who have behaved well far away. The carts turn a fraction, then another. A stream that was unfamiliar introduces itself, and everyone recognises its cousin upstream. The reeds look like the ones near the horse's preferred sleeping ground. Fires at the end of the day are made with the particular assurance a man has when he can point in the dark and say that way and be right. The cauldron tastes of your own salt again, which is a flavour cooks cannot imitate, only recognise and salute. No one makes speeches. There are small ceremonies whose only witness is the night. A rider thanks his horse for having fewer opinions this journey than last. A woman unfolds a cloth that was folded before the column left and declares it no worse for the waiting. A child adds a new notch to a stick he has been permitted to keep and admires how far the notches have come without anyone needing to get hurt to make them. Attila steps into the big tent as if he had not left it, which is how a tent should be treated if you intend it to keep loving you. After the kettles have said their piece and the last ladle has been polite to the last bowl, men compare notes that are not numbers. They talk about a town where the shadow of the wall in late afternoon makes a stripe a child can walk in without getting too warm. They talk about a low shrine by a road where a woman left flowers as if she knew the horses needed to see something gentle. They talk about a ferryman who was so good at his work no one minded his prices. They talk about a baker who salted his bread as if he were building the sea by handfuls. These are the trophies men keep when they no longer need silver to feel rich. The news to the south settles in and becomes routine. Coin arrives as promised and is counted without a poet in the room. Markets open on days that start to smell predictable. A border captain who loved his whistle too much learns to love his ledger a little more. The church bells learn new rhythms that suit prosperity. The walls stand and are grateful for the rest as much as stone can be grateful. An earthquake mended in parts by human hands mends further, because human hands do good work when given wages and time. By the close of this part, the metronome has taught everyone the same lesson in different languages. The lesson is that power to persist must learn to move like weather, firm, patient, interested in where it is going rather than how it is introduced. The riders return with a map changed by finger widths that matter. The court returns to the habit of pretending its walls are sufficient because, for now, they are. The border towns return to the old sport of counting mules and deciding which ones have humour and which ones require patience. The river remembers everything and tells none of it, which is a condition of being a river. You go out to look at the stars and discover they have kept their positions reliably, as if to encourage men to take themselves less seriously than their coin, and their courage would like to insist. Somewhere a song is played softly, a tune that people use when it is useful to understand one another without agreeing on adjectives. Somewhere a dog lies down exactly where a man will want to put his hand when he wakes. Somewhere a blade with a story the size of a god glints in low light and behaves itself. Somewhere a courier dreams of roads that do not exist yet and will soon. Tomorrow the pace will tilt westward and collect new obligations. A ring will be weighed for more than its metal. An invitation no one can read without smiling will find its addressee. A general with the patience of a farmer and the heart of a neighbour will move pieces on a board that is also a country. The dust over a field will try to write history before the historian arrives. For the moment the basin holds the riders, and the riders hold the basin, and the river approves by saying nothing. The metronome clicks once more in the dark and then, satisfied with its own competence, lets you sleep. The year wears a different coat now, softer at the edges and smelling faintly of thawed earth and smoke cured by patience. The basin still holds its familiar bowl of pastures and paths, but every path seems to lean a little to the west, as if the land itself had tilted its ear to hear something on the far side of old frontiers. No one announces the change. It is there in the timbre of conversations at dusk, in the way dispatch riders knot their messages, in the quiet places between bowl and mouth where thoughts do their slow arithmetic. A rumour has stepped into the camp and taken a seat near the kettle. It has brought a ring with it. The ring, in the best stories, belongs to a woman who is tired of being furniture in someone else's panelled room. She is imperial, which is to say her life is made of doors that open only from one side. She writes a letter that tastes of plea and policy in equal measure, and ties it to a circle of gold that ought to have remained a private promise. The letter finds its way to a hand not born in a palace. It is held in a palm that reads opportunity the way some men read prayers, slowly twice and with a small difficult smile. The woman's name will be spoken later with a drama that suits music. For now it travels in low voices, as if it might change shape if said too loudly. You've heard it already. Everyone has. Even people who swear they do not care about court nonsense can repeat it if pressed. Honoria. Whether the ring truly arrived is a debate for scribes with neat writing and strong tea. In the tents, truth wears a different coat. A rumour is a tool. It can lever a door, it can wedge a gate, it can weigh a choice that was already sitting on the scale. The rumour says an invitation has been extended to get between a woman and her future, and that the future might be persuaded to bring its dowry early. The rumour is not a command. Commands have a sound that people obey out of habit. Rumours have a sound that people answer with a question. Attila hears the rumour and does not lean forward. He lets it sit beside the kettle as if it were just another guest in need of warmth. The idea of West is older than the rumour. Riders who have wintered well grow curious in spring. The grass promises a path. The rivers offer their shoulders like good companions who don't talk too much. There is also an old pattern the court can feel without naming. When the south is arranged, the west invites. The basin does not mind. It is a home for a people who move. It expects to be left and expects to be returned to. Saddles are mended with a devotion usually reserved for sacred things. Bow cases are checked and smiled at like children who have learned both manners and mischief. Horses have their hooves paired neatly, a barber's gift to the road. You walk among the picketed lines in the grey before dawn and see how a campaign begins without ever admitting it's a campaign. Men who will later be called soldiers are doing the same tasks as men who will later be called farmers, just with different audiences. They count what can be counted, arrows, sacks, steps, days, and they look at the sky for what cannot. A woman takes her husband's wrist and reties a knot with a tenderness she will not speak of in front of others. A boy fetches the little bronze weights used for scales and is allowed to keep one in his pocket so that luck will think him rich and follow. Someone puts his head into a tent to say that a certain road through the Oaks is drier this year than last. Someone else says that the market at Trier serves a stew like an argument you end up agreeing with. The road does not mind being spoken to in advance. The first days west are a lesson in how many Europes the word Europe can hide. The land is not an open book. It's a series of folded letters, each crease a river or a ridge. Each fold a language you can learn by listening with your knees as much as your ears. There are marshlands where the reeds whisper in a dialect that makes horses step higher. There are stretches of road that were paved when your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather didn't exist yet, and are still sturdy enough to tease you into a faster pace. There are boundary stones holding onto their inscriptions with the loyalty of old friends, and farm walls that have pronounced opinions about how carts should behave. Hills hold villages like nuts hold their meat, snug, defended by habit as much as by height. The smell of baking changes. The bread asks to be torn in different size pieces. Wine changes the angle of conversation. Beer changes the subject entirely. All along the way, answers walk toward the riders like neighbours who have been waiting for company. Some wear Roman titles without making a fuss about it. They hold their cities for emperors whose writ has grown thin, but whose coins still fit the slots of memory. Some wear names that were never written in Roman law but have learned its benefits. Waterworks kept working, bridges kept mended, market days kept sacred like chapel bells. In one town, the gate opens with the embarrassment of a host surprised by guests he hoped would write first. In another, the gate remains politely shut and a window opens instead, and a baker with flour up to his wrist points to the right door to knock on if you want to talk to a man who can count. Farther west, in places where Latin is turning into something more local, and vowels change their minds on the breeze, children follow the column at a distance long enough to be safe and short enough to be exciting. They learn quickly which horses will flick an ear for them, which dogs will tolerate a pat, and which men will pretend to scowl before sharing a crust. Rumour travels ahead and behind like two bright dogs that never tire. Ahead, it says that Attila rides to claim a ring no one promised him in public. It says he rides to collect a dowry no one will admit has been offered. It says he will marry the West to its consequences and dance in the Feast of Emperors. Behind, rumour says something quieter, that the riders will pass if they are offered respect and calculation in equal portions. It says a town that chooses to trade will be allowed to boast later that it outlived a legend by using its head. People pick the version that helps them sleep. Sleep is a currency too. Across the Alps' shadowed shoulder, voices shift again. The air smells of pine resin and steep water. The roads narrow in a way that makes wagons whisper to their axles. Be good, be good. In the fold of a valley, an old man points with his stick and tells a story that might be fact and might be comfort. He says that long ago a sword fell from heaven and the land learned to follow the man who found it. Then he laughs and says all swords fall from somewhere and all men need a story to make them brave at supper. You like him at once. He sells you a piece of cheese that tastes like discipline and tells you an exit that does not appear on any Roman itinerary. The exit turns out to be a path only when you are already on it. Southwest, on the other bank of history, a general with a farmer's patience and a neighbour's smile hears the hoofbeats as if they were knocking on his own gate. His name is said with a sigh by men who prefer simple enemies, Aetius. He has made friends of yesterday's rivals more than once. He understands that men follow a banner if a paycheck is attached to the pole and a promise is tied just beneath it. He has called Visigoths, Burgundians, Franks, Alans, and whoever else can be persuaded, bribed, reminded, or gently bullied to bring their small worlds into a large temporary circle. He does not pretend this circle will hold forever. He only needs it to hold through one dusk. The riders do not rush to meet him. They do not avoid him either. Attila moves with the confidence of a man who knows that interception is also a form of conversation. He pushes where the road gives, and rests where a push would bend more than he's willing to pay for. He looks for the places where a field is not merely earth, but theatre. He thinks about water first. He always thinks about water first. Men who speak of him as a scourge have never had to water a column. Men who have watered a column tend to call him sane. Somewhere on a green that has learned to hold horses without complaint, an envoy from a small city on the way approaches with a face practiced in not flinching. He brings an argument dressed as hospitality. He says, this town is loyal to its obligations, and those include feeding its children. He says, your column is large enough to be a fact, and facts can be behaved with. He says, if you allow my gate to be the mouth through which your men buy bread instead of the teeth against which they break, both of us will be remembered as clever. He bows in a manner that lets his spine keep its pride. Attila answers with a sentence that has become his signature in these months. Be ready to be reasonable. The gate opens like a learned response. Gaul stretches out like a sentence trying to decide where to place its commas. There are vineyards that look like arithmetic from a low hill and like music when you walk among them. There are towns with names that will change their jackets in the centuries to come, but for now they wear Roman cut with local embroidery. There are shrines where the old gods don't take it personally that new ones have arrived. Bells practice being important and find that they are. On a certain day, a path becomes a choice. There is dust on the horizon that is not made by the riders. The dust is organised. It moves with expectation. Somewhere a man on a chestnut horse laughs softly because the map has finally cleared its throat and begun to speak. They say the meeting of forces on the plain was a battle. The word works if you handle it carefully. The Catalonian plains is what the scholars will write, because scholars like names with bones. You can stand on that ground and know exactly why men thought to stop there. The earth undulates like a careful quilt. The light sits low and makes every decision look taller than it feels. It is not holy ground, it is practical ground. Men can see each other a good distance away. Nobody likes surprises on a field day. If you stood there early before the noise, you would have seen a theatre assembling itself. The lords of many flags set up their temporary pretensions. Aetius, who knows how to manage men who think they manage themselves, rides the lines and looks like a man checking fences after hard wind. His Visigothic ally, Theodoric, rides with the heavy grace of one who knows songs will say his name whether he asks them to or not. Bands of Franks and Alans, brave to the point of comedy until comedy has to leave the room, set their places like men laying stones for a bridge that they hope someone else will cross first. Across the field, the riders arrange themselves less as ranks and more as possibilities. They bend around a hill like a thought that has not yet decided to be a sentence. Flags climb the wind by habit. Bows familiarly ask their strings if they are ready to sing. Horses chew as if unconcerned with what humans have planned. Horses are famously correct about schedules. Legends prefer thunder and righteousness. The day prefers dust and the mathematics of time. The arguments begin at the far edges, because arguments always do. It is not a single push so much as the clatter of many sums being worked out at once. The dust rises like a curtain surprised into performance. Trumpets call, and you think of geese, but only briefly. The lines meet cleanly where discipline suggests they should, and a messily where surprise insists on being invited. Riders wheel. Men on foot plant their courage and discover that courage holds best as when you have practiced in poor weather. Somewhere the Visigothic king falls and the news pulls a circle tight and then lets it breathe again. Somewhere men who have pledged to stand at the weak point find that they do not begrudge their oath, because their bodies, obligingly, have made it easier to keep than to flee. Aetius holds the coalition with the same talent he uses to hold reluctant conversations at dinner. He reminds this band that their pride lives next door to that band's pride, and that neighbourhood etiquette matters if anyone intends to sleep inside walls tonight. He rides where his face will keep men from inventing excuses. He sends a message where a message will arrive before the rumour does. He does not try to be everywhere. He tries to be at the place where a decision will refuse to be made unless someone looks it in the eye. He has practiced that look. It is not theatrical, it is plain. It says, "We have agreed, so let us agree." Attila, on the other side of the day, keeps the shape he came with and tries to fold the field into something that will pack well by nightfall. He does not chase too far, he gathers what is offered and does not pay double for what is not. He watches the sun in that way experienced riders watch it, as if the light itself were a participant with a talent for surprise. Once, maybe twice, he pushes where a hill insists on being flattered. Once, maybe twice, he pulls back where the ground hints it will not take a second insult. His men do not panic because he does not. The dogs back at camp sleep contentedly. You can rely on the dogs to tell you more than flags will. There is noise enough to make poets happy and actually helpful silence in the pockets where intent survives. Men drink from skins without tasting. They look at their leaders and see whether their faces are still made of the same ingredients as in the morning. The leaders' faces are. Near sunset, when the light flattens the ground until even small men look like statuary, the field is tired of being a field. It wants to be the edge between two evenings. It gets what it wants. Both sides end the day with a story they can take home and tell without lying too much. To say the riders were stopped is true if you like straight lines. To say the riders decided the cost exceeded the taste is truer if you like soup seasoned with realism. The coalition does not end here. The Huns do not either. The plain, after a night of sighing and a day of collecting what it has been asked to hold, goes back to being a place where sheep might find grass right when grass is a nice idea. Men who survived invent phrases that sound brave when told around a fire. Their wives correct the grammar of the stories later in private. Plunder is weighed against the miles home. The scales make a sound like a judicious If you walk the field at first light on the morning after, you see the day's honesty sitting in small details. A shield has slid until it nestles against a tuft of ground as if to say, "Here then." An arrow has bitten into a plank, which has bitten into the soil, which has decided to keep both without confessing why. A broken strap has been repaired by a knot that would have sufficed if only time had allowed it to be tied. You are grateful for the light, which allows you to see without inventing. Someone offers you water. You drink and do not ask questions that would be unkind to the answers. The stories that travel fastest are not of the field. They are of two men who chose to keep their dignity. Aetius, who could have chased glory and decided to herd allies home instead so they would be available next season. Attila, who could have chased spite and decided to turn Westward patience into a question for the next year's map. Later historians will slice this into strategies with crisp edges. In the tense, it translates into something ordinary and hard, the craft of leaving almost happy. Beyond the field, the road offers Italy as a new page. The Alps will always be drama, they cannot help themselves. Attila does not confess to being tempted by theatre. He is tempted by what can be carried out again, a logic he shares with any good cook packing up a feast. The thought of cities with grand names and empty granaries is a thought sober men can handle. The lords of the peninsula are practicing a new kind of worry, quiet and precise. The general who has just learned that coalitions can survive, Dusk spends the winter months practicing his next conversation. The Pope, who shares his name with lions and later legends, prays in rooms where the echoes are trained to encourage. There is a story that on the way into the peninsula a town discovered how many times a bell can ring in an hour. There is a story that on a certain northern road a bronze cauldron slid off a cart, rolled into a ditch, and refused to leave until 3 men promised it would be used for soup that would include garlic. There is a story that geese in a cloister taught a clerk to invent a faster file because they would not tolerate the boy's delay at feeding time. All such stories are the bright seeds of a darker soil. The land was tired. Famine had been doing its patient scold. Disease had been teaching the old lesson about the cost of crowds. When the riders come in a year like that, they are not the only actors on the stage. Rome proper is not the target. The map warns against hubris with its small ink. Aquileia on the northern lip learns the meaning of a siege told without sentiment. The city holds until it cannot perform that verb any longer. It is not a proud episode, and not a shameful one. It is simply what happens when later runs out. The refugees do what all refugees since time began have done, turn what they can carry into a plan, and water into a habit, and an island into a community that will one day be called Venice by people who need a reason to be proud of their ancestors. If you stand at the edge of a marsh and listen, you can hear the future's polite cough. It will need a little help getting seated, but it has reservations. In that year, a meeting is told in voices that prefer paintings. A bishop with a reputation for spine rides north to speak words intended to slow a man who has never needed other men's adjectives. The bishop's name is Leo. Later centuries will attach the word saint to him because he did the one thing saints are always required to do. He used courage without wasting it. Whether Attila saw a vision behind Leo's shoulder is the kind of detail God enjoys not clarifying. What is clear is that the conversation had the right quantities of respect, calculation and weather. The rider turned aside. The bishop went home to a city that had chosen to continue. Each told a version to their own that did not embarrass the other. Between them, famine and fever had already been arguing against drama. The argument was persuasive. You sit with a group of riders that night under a sky trying out its autumn stars. The soup is thin, the humour not. Someone tells a tale of a she-wolf who argued with a spear and lost, and went to sulk in the story of Rome's founding as compensation. Someone keeps a candle lit longer than necessary, and watches the wax run in obedient rivers, a tiny practice for the Danube on its winter will. Someone says the Pope's horse looked well fed, and someone else says may all horses be well fed, including our own, and everyone lifts a cup a respectable distance and drinks that modest wish. Attila says very little. He has never needed to narrate his days to himself in order to believe them. He's comfortable with the version where he chose a cost and refused an extravagance. When the column turns back towards the basin, the road does that thing where it feels shorter because it fits. Men talk about bread again the way men do, when they have decided not to invent heroism where it is not needed. There are jokes that have grown calluses from being told too often. They are still good because people still laugh at the expected places. The horses move with the satisfied economy of well-kept machines that know their schedule makes sense. A wagon's wheel sings when it catches the rhythm of a smoother road, and a child, ridiculous with glee, makes up a song on the spot that everybody pretends not to memorize. Behind, the coalition dissolves the way froth does when the wind makes up its mind to chase a smell from the kitchens instead. Everybody goes home with a story that protects pride without insulting facts. Aetius, precise in the way men must be when their future is made of the same men they just stopped fighting beside, writes letters whose shortest sentences are the most helpful. Theodoric's people sing songs that remember his crown more softly than he wore it. The Franks teach their children a new kind of boast. The Alans take their pay in the coin they like best, which is permission. Across those lands, small towns return to preoccupations that empire had tried to banish and found it could not. Harvest, marriageage, gossip about roofs. In the basin, the nights begin earlier. The tent breathes in that contented way it does when you have returned with enough and lost less than rumour threatened. There is work to do. Work is always glad to see men who can be trusted with it. Lists grow on birch and wood and in heads. All are equally binding. The bags of coin that arrive from the east feel heavier because their weight has become home's weight again. The horse strings are rotated to let tired backs be lazy without consequences. The bow cases are opened, cleaned, oiled, closed, and hung with the satisfaction craftsmen get from visiting a tool that has behaved in public. The legends that settle into this part of the story know their jobs. One says Attila gathered his men and held up the ring, if there was a ring, and asked them what a circle meant when drawn across a map. The answer, in the legend, is that a circle means you return. Another says that a raven flew ahead on the road to Italy, and turned back only when the fevers began, a polite messenger pointing the way faith would be more useful. Another says that the sword from the pasture whispered from its scabbard, and made a suggestion about prudence to which all other swords in the vicinity rolled their eyes. These legends do not need to be right, they need to be comforting. Comfort is not a small task when winter remembers your address. Aetius's name continues to travel in the rider's camp, not as an enemy to be mocked, but as a man to be respected because he practiced the same arts they admire, keeping men together longer than men like to be kept, saying the shorter true thing when the longer pretty thing is available, making market days seem like courage by insisting on them. Aetius's caution now lives beside the rumour that soon enough somebody in a silk robe will decide that a man that useful is also a man that dangerous. The riders do not wish that rumour true. They know the cost of removing competence from a fragile structure, but they also know how often fragile structures insist on their drama. A kettle hums its scepticism. Near the end of the season, a singer visits the camp, the kind who knows the trick of retelling without reopening wounds. She sings of the field where dust wrote first and men edited later. She sings of a ring that might have been, and a letter that could always be. She sings of a lion bishop who walked with a voice that taught men why law had been invented. She sings of oak forests that remained oak forests after famous horses had passed through. She sings of a city that fell correctly and caused a lagoon to become a plan. Her voice is a warm blanket pulled up to the chin of memory. You close your eyes, not from sorrow, but from the relief of being held in a tone that chooses not to bruise. Attila listens not as a king being entertained, but as a man whose day is steadied by a familiar craft. When the song finishes, he nods twice, the way a rider nods to a horse who has performed exactly within the expected gait. He walks outside where the air has started to think about certain kinds of frost again. He looks at stars that do not answer questions, which is often their best contribution. He hears dogs decide to bark and then decide against the effort. He holds in his mind the shapes of two campaigns that want to live at once, and decides only to feed the one that will be hungry in spring. He sleeps without sending anyone to watch his dreams. If you step out later, the grass has a brittle sweetness under your boots. Somewhere a horse turns in his sleep and flatters himself with a little dance before remembering that he is tethered, and it is impolite to wake everyone with delight. A child mutters a list of place names learned from men who like their words balanced like saddlebags. Metz, Troyes, somewhere with a name you can't quite pronounce that the child already does. The river that treated you kindly in the first part continues its work of reminding the land where to sit. You taste that iron cold in your teeth and count it as a familiar. The morning will ask the court to think about its east again, about roads that crows have been auditioning in their murmurous way, about a corridor whose name is a line drawn at the narrowest waist of a map, about faces in Constantinople that look new, but intend the same old moves with the same old coins. There will be a year when Italy is visited again, not by hoofbeats but by rumours of hoofbeats, and when rumour alone moves a town to an island. There will be a year when a cup is raised and the room is louder than it means to be, and the next morning arrives without the voice that has been making the arithmetic behave. Before we cross to that room, sit a while with the West that was met and not taken, the field that was attempted and not owned, the bishop who was listened to because he talked like a man who could explain fire to a wall. Let the soup do its modest healing. Let the tense breath persuade you that home is what you can fold and unfold without losing its shape. You return to the kettle because the kettle is the one reliable oracle in any century. It says yes in steam, and it says not yet in a thinner steam, and it says of course in a song that you can't hear until you've eaten and stopped wanting so much from everybody. The rumour about the ring sits beside it, now warm and a little sheepish. You look at the ring and understand that whether it existed was never the point. The point was that West has always been less a direction than a sentence beginning, and the riders have always known how to finish sentences without making them rude. Sleep takes you as if invited by a host who understands you should never be made to feel like a favour. The tent holds you. The river remembers you. The field in Gaul forgets you, which is appropriate, because fields should not be made to carry grudges. Attila's camp darkens without fear. The dogs roll up knots of warmth. A single star slips behind a cloud and re-emerges with a sigh. And somewhere, in a palace where the stone floors are confident and the curtains tire of moving, a woman who sent a letter whether or not she sent a letter sleeps as well, knowing that her name has taken on the strange life names do when they are borrowed by story. Tomorrow you will wake to a colder sound and the road will swing its compass back toward the Balkans and the ledges of the Eastern Court. The hexy narrowness of another empire's waste will teach you about corridors. The word Nadao will sharpen on the stone of experience. A famous cup will be lifted and set down, and everything that held a tent steady will be asked to hold a confederation steady with the tent emptying of its oldest certainty. Not yet. For this night, keep the aftertaste of a western wind and the dignity of a day that ended with two sides still themselves. The kettle agrees, the hoofbeats drift to the edge of hearing, and the stars, those patient scribes, write one more line in their tidy script, enough for now. The season that begins is the sort that changes its mind 3 times before noon. Frost at daybreak, mud by mid-morning, a ribbon of wind at the hour when men pretend they are not hungry yet. Nothing dramatic announces itself, and yet the camp understands that the road has turned invisible lines into visible ones. South is not merely a direction, it is a conversation. West is not merely a horizon, it is a rumour wearing a ring. Men get on with the things that keep larger things from wobbling. Axles are soothed with tallow and talk. Bowstrings are listened to with the same patience people give to children learning new words. Horses are groomed until their coats remark upon the attention by shining even where the sun does not reach. A woman knots a cord, checks the knot's opinion of sudden cold, and ties it again with a compromise learned from winters that did not negotiate. Somewhere a boy leans over a brazier and warms a sealing wax the exact shade of seriousness. He pretends he's bored and hopes he's believed. The movement towards the Balkans begins as all honest movements do, with a schedule disguised as a shrug. The riders leave in strings that resemble sentences, each clause clear enough to be understood on its own if separated by weather. The Danube watches with the tolerant dignity of a teacher familiar with repeat students. The Sava and the Morava whisper their usual advice about fords that behave and banks that pout. Attila rides with a map mostly stored in muscle memory, the sort of map you carry in your knees and in the tilt of your head when the light is treacherous. He does not need to say where they are going. Men who have learned his kind of quiet know which gates are due a visit and which depots are ripe for the kind of attention that makes a treasurer revise adjectives. The empire to the south breathes in through its walls and out through its courtyards. Dispatches walk in sandals and gallop in margins. A clerk who writes a beautiful hand pauses to watch the wax tremble on the spoon and tells himself that trembling is not a commentary. An old general fills in the parts of the map the younger ones forget are not empty. A bishop looks up from a homily and reminds himself that charity and famine is arithmetical as well as theological. When the ground shakes along the long spine of the sea, once, twice, again with afterthoughts, stones lose their confidence and the men who live among them gain a temporary talent for caution. A city counts itself and finds a few corners lacking. Cautious men speak louder, and coin leaves vaults and carts covered by blankets that used to be costumes. The road north of the walls hears the sound that coin makes when it has been newly convinced of its purpose. Across drifted snows that have learned to disappear by noon, the riders measure their days in the impeccable language of supply. Soup is planned by men who can guess the temperature of water by the way it steams when ladled. Grain is apportioned by women who know which bags sulk if stacked against the tent's north side. Willows by the marsh donate withes, and oxen lean into the work as if gravity owed them a living. A shallow river is argued with and, after a polite exchange of principles, agrees to hold still for a row of hooves. The column moves like a decision no one will admit was painful. Where towns appreciate schedules more than heroics, gates open with the chaste pleasure of hinges newly oiled. Salt is bought, bread is weighed, men exchange coins with the mutual courtesy of shopkeepers pretending not to enjoy a good price. Where pride thickens a governor's neck, a bridge appears briefly in the form of boats and planks, ambition lashed to prudence, and the column crosses without daring the town to do anything regrettable. The wall keeps its dignity, the road keeps its promise. If someone needs a story afterward, they may tell one about a near thing. Near things are a respectable genre. Messages ride slightly ahead of the hooves. They tell border captains the correct lie to use if a superior asks whether he has seen anything. They tell priests which storerooms to empty first so the poor will remember whose door opened at the right hour. They tell grain dealers that schedules, like saints, require candles. Men with seals break them gently and feel beneath the wax the cool firmness of agreement. There is relief in a number that sits patiently on a page without needing constant rearrangement. Evenings come early in this work. The lamps in the tents are honest, which is to say not generous, and the kettles keep their small covenant, to hum and not to boil over. Stories are told at the pace of spoons. The metronome of the season clicks in the wrist, in the ankle, in the mouth that says just enough and then stops. If legend sits down by the fire, it keeps its elbows to itself. One night, perhaps, someone mentions a blade found in a pasture, sleeping in the grass as if the earth itself were practicing being a scabbard. Men nod as one nods at omens that will be useful next time an argument needs a last word. Women note the place where the story's details are strongest. They will retell it correctly when the men begin to embroider. Work persuades payment, and payment persuades peace. The courtiers of Constantinople, for it is largely their part of the empire that receives this instruction, learn to move coin along safer roads. A scale that has been too light is corrected by a hand that does not care for metaphors. Tribute that yesterday sounded theatrical today sounds like sage arithmetic. The ink dries, the carts roll. A few men write pious phrases beneath amounts that will be counted by other men whose piety is expressed with accurate ledgers. North of the line, in the tents where words get used up rather than displayed, bags are opened and their contents translated into promises kept, horses fed, friends remembered in winter. Nothing in this pattern is immortal, but while it holds with a music that keeps men from seeking louder songs. The metronome teaches a lesson in timekeeping that nobody is ashamed to have learned. Attila returns to the basin with the mood of a man whose chores, being necessary, have been completed with the kind of grace that makes necessity look like good taste. His sleep is untroubled and ordinary, which is to say a luxury few rulers can afford. Then comes the rumour, as rumours prefer to come, not when you're idle, but when you're busy with excellent reasons. It perches on the bench nearest the kettle and produces a ring as if producing a coin for a parlour trick. A woman's name floats above it, the name already warm from being spoken elsewhere, Honoria. The rumour tells a tidy story about a letter smuggled across layers of authority like a note in a classroom, and about a promise strapped to a finger in the hope that fingers still solved problems in this world. Whether the ring existed matters less than the sound the rumour makes as it circles the camp. It is the sound of a door being tested with the softest possible knock. The room inside is Western. Attila treats the rumour the way he treats weather, as a fact that might be useful if understood, and harmless if not fed beyond its appetite. He does not change his voice. He does not rush. West has been inviting itself into the conversation for years, and now it sends good sureties that taste like invitation. The basin is patient with departures. Saddles are mended, till their leather forgets all its sulks. Bowcases nod at one another, like old friends on market day. Horses are assessed for humour as much as for strength, because the road to Gaul prefers animals who will forgive a bad patch of mud without filing a complaint. The turn toward the setting sun is a lesson in how many kinds of ground can become polite if asked by the right hooves. Roman roads take a deep breath and remember how to be useful. Newer tracks, drawn by men who dislike parades, lead past hedges heavy with birds. The words in the air change shape in mouths that keep the same smiles. Bread tastes of different soils. Wine arrives like a cousin whose stories are longer than your patience and better than your memory. In villages where Latin is trying out new vowels, children learn to recognise the riders by the sound their dogs make when deciding whether they are worth escorting. Farther west, the continent gathers its little empires the way a coat gathers burrs. A general with the farmer's habit of weather-watching, Etius, looks up from his maps, looks down at his allies, and arranges both with the competence of man who knows which promises last past sunset. He has Visigoths who will stand with him because the alternative tightens the throat. He has Burgundians who have learned that neighbours are best managed with invitations. He has Franks who enjoy decisions, Alans who enjoy their horses, and a packet of small kings whose talent is for becoming important precisely when a gap appears in the line. He collects them not with speeches but with nods, and the kind of coin that behaves like a well-timed compliment. The riders do not hurry to meet him, because haste wastes horses and clarity. They also do not dodge him, because dodging writes the wrong kind of rumour. Attila tests fields with his eye the way a carpenter tests a board by running a hand along the grain. He watches water first. He always watches water first. He follows roads where they are honest and ignores them where they insist on their own importance. He makes sure the column arrives where bread has been persuaded to be ready. He speaks to small cities in the adoptable language of market days, and the gates answer in the tone shared by hosts who know the difference between a guest and a problem. Gaul is a stage that changes scenery while the actors are speaking. Vineyards run like arithmetic up a slope. Towns wear Roman names with local accents. Shrines accept candles from saints and nod politely towards stones that remember other gods. Bells rehearse for emergencies by mastering ordinary days, and in the middle distance dust begins to rise in a way that is not the rider's fault. Dust has heard its name called. It collects itself over a place that looks suspiciously like a field designed by someone who enjoyed watching men make up stories afterward. They will call it the Catalonian Plains because names fasten a lid on a pot. If you arrive early, the plain is only what plains always are. A quilt of slopes and conveniences, a place where sightlines behave. Men assemble with the self-importance of any parade about to forget that it is a parade. Aetius rides the lines like a man checking if his neighbours have remembered to anchor their haystacks. Theodoric of the Visigoths moves with a heavy grace that makes songs nervous in advance. Franks and Alans find dignity in proximity. Across the way, the riders arrange themselves not as a wall but as an argument, flexible, considerate of angles, attentive to the possibility of going home. The day does not roar, it accumulates. First the edges discover their obligations to one another, then the middle remembers that middles are rarely safe. Dust rises into the story in curtains and then in sentences. Trumpets make their earnest shapes in the air. Men on foot plant themselves where the ground does not complain. Men on horses teach their nerves to wait for the leg's instruction. Arrows write quick opinions, shields disagree. Somewhere Theodoric falls, and the news becomes the kind of wave that tries to become a flood and then, through the intervention of men too stubborn to be fashionable, does not. Aetius does not chase victory. He shepherds cohesion. He rides where faces need to see a plan. He speaks where ears will carry his tone longer than his words. Attila keeps the line supple. He pushes where a hill promises to forgive a second attempt. He withdraws where the field threatens to charge double for a small gain. He rides the length of a thought and then lets it rest. He does not spend rage when arithmetic will purchase the same result. His men watch his shoulders for the angle that means now, and for the angle that means not now. Both arrive on time, when light flattens across the ground and even small trees look like the staves of a psalm. The day decides to end. To say the riders were defeated flatters the plain. To say they were convinced to prefer a different page is closer to the sound the horses made when they turned. The coalition holds itself together, with the exhausted pride of men who have stood in rain and then remembered to carry their tools inside. Both sides have stories. Both sides leave with receipts, bruises and counts and the names of neighbours who did what neighbours should. Night accepts the truce men cannot sign and turns the field back into a space where sheep could learn to trust again. West has not ended. It has simply taught the price of insisting. There is, beyond the fields and the polite slopes, a peninsula holding cities like beads on a twine. The Alps are a choice as much as they are a wall. The riders take the choice. Italy is tired that year, hungry in places where it once was boastful, and fever has been writing its unsentimental commentary in neighbourhoods that know how to pray. This is not a stage for triumph so much as a place to test whether logistics can outvote sorrow. Aquileia learns the kind of lesson that prefers not to be taught. It holds until holding becomes theatre without audience, and then it falls, correctly, to the calculus of men who have run out of alternatives. Refugees do what refugees do best, turn water and wood into community, and a lagoon learns how to be a city by eavesdropping on human necessity. Farther down the map, bells exercise their right to be important and do not waste their privilege. People rehearse the ancient business of surviving, which has always been a collaboration between stubbornness and soup. And then there is the meeting the painter's favour. A bishop on a horse rides out from Rome to speak to a man who has never worried about his own adjectives. The bishop's name is Leo. The stories later clothe him in vision, because visions do good work in stained glass. Whether Attila saw omens at Leo's shoulder is the sort of detail that sleep withholds from historians. What the ground remembers is that two men talked with the complementary energies of courage and patience, while famine and fever stood behind the bishop making persuasive faces. The rider turned aside. The city continued. The story acquired more gold leaf with each retelling and does not apologise for it. On the way back north, Italy is a sequence of small indulgences denied or granted. A cartwheel rings with a brighter note because the road is kinder for a mile. A mule behaves as if it has remembered a joke and carries it all day without telling. Wine tastes of low slopes and the end of arguments. Men sing songs that are not hymns and not war, just the long vowels of getting home. The basin's pull grows daily, a tide made of grass, and the dogs at the tethered lines sit up the afternoon before their masters arrive, as if the camp itself had sniffed the column on the wind. The ring that may or may not have begun the Westward page takes its place among the camp's minor gods. The spoon that always found the bottom, the knife that never sulked, the charm tied to a bridle by a woman who refused to explain its working. Honoria's name becomes a small, complicated smile in conversations conducted at a comfortable distance from politics. She remains less a person than an excellent idea, a reminder that courts invent levers even when they pretend to prefer wheels. Back in the basin, the old furniture is good in the hand. The felt breathes the way it does when it approves of the weather. The kettles remember recipes learned on roads and improve them quietly with local water. Men compare scars with the unsentimental kindness of craftsmen comparing tools. If stories are told about the plains in Gaul, they are told at a murmur that respects other people's sleep. Nobody wastes nighttime on boasting that will be regretted in the morning. A winter studies the camp from a distance and then arrives with the professional briskness of someone who knows their job is necessary and not always admired. The court's work is the same as ever. Keep the hay honest, the promises punctual, the horses understanding, the gifts onto mime, the jokes gentle. There is talk about the East again, the old metronome calling for a tune-up. There is talk about Italy again, not with plans, but with that polite interest people show a neighbour who may visit at an inconvenient hour. There is talk now and then about the future in the way tents discuss futures, by checking ropes, by stitching seams that won't be inspected until they fail, by teaching children to count in measures of days and hooves rather than kings and coins. In such a winter, there is also a night that grows too loud for its own good. Cups are raised, the old songs do as old songs always do, and the men who prefer wooden drinking vessels out of principle are coaxed into accepting gold for the sake of company. The room approves, the room keeps approving. Morning arrives with its two questions: what happened, and how shall we proceed? The answer to the first is told in voices that practice tenderness. A ruler is gone, not on a field but in a tent, not in fury but in celebration's wake. The answer to the second is told in the only tone that saves nations. We proceed by remembering what kept us steady, before any one person's name filled the tent. After grief arithmetic, sons appear in sentences weighted like saddlebags, and loyal chiefs measure loyalty again, because loyalty, like leather, becomes most beautiful when cared for and will crack if neglected. The basin does not judge, it simply holds while people perform the almost impossible trick of remaining themselves without the habit of a familiar voice at the centre. To the west and north, neighbours watch with the well-trained shrewdness of men who have quite recently learned to cooperate under a general named Aetius. To the south and east, a court that has paid for quiet counts its coins with a new curiosity about whether quiet can be found at a discount. Across a river that has always been the best writer of footnotes, a coalition begins to hum. Not loudly yet, but with the sort of confidence that comes from studying someone else's playbook and deciding to use it. The Gepid Arderic, whose name moves in the mouth like a useful oath, gathers men who have known the tent from its doorway and from its inside. Others who have served the riders serve themselves now with the art they learned. The place they will meet has a name like a stone skipping once on water, and it exists as all battlefields exist, as a usually peaceful place temporarily asked to do too much. When they meet, the riders are not what they were before a cup was set down, and the brothers became a single man and then no man at all. They are brave, bravery is abundant as grass among them. But cohesion is the trick that turns bravery into weather, and cohesion has opinions of its own today. Men who once turned at a single angle now turn at several, and the space between those turns is where loss sits down. Nadao becomes the kind of decision that refuses to explain itself except in the plain language of who walks away. The coalition has learned enough of the Hunnic kind of patience to do what patience does in a minute, when taught well for a decade. The riders learn that even good maps fray at their favourite fold. Defeat is an interesting teacher, it insists on attention and makes you write legibly. The Confederation does not evaporate, it redeploys. Some families accept the invitations of new lords whose tents do not feel entirely foreign. Some ride out toward other borders where the Riverlights are arranged differently, but the kettles hum in a dialect they recognise. Some stay and become a memory that changes costume with each retelling. Huns in law codes, Etzel in songs by hearthlight, patterns of polychrome jewellery that continue to brighten belts long after names have settled into dust. Rome, for its part, loses the man who held so many temporary alliances inside his two hands. Aetius does not die at Nidau. He dies in a room where knives disguise themselves as policy. The Empire will tell itself that a problem has been solved. The roads remember that the man who solved problems has been removed, and they do not take the news kindly. There is a small mercy in the synchrony of endings. Nobody has to pretend the world is simpler than yesterday. Nobody gets away with saying we did not know the cost of losing steady men. Years afterwards, in towns built partly of memories and largely of need, children ask about Attila the way children ask about hills. The answers are precise and generous. He was a man who fed his dogs and preferred wooden cups and let winter teach lessons instead of preaching them himself. He was a man who talked more with the arrangement of people than with words, and who measured victories in schedules rather than in statues. He was terrible when terrible was cheaper than being patient and patient, whenever patience bought more tomorrows at the markets that mattered. A good storyteller lets the children fall asleep before the field at Gaul arrives in the story, and saves the bishop and the lion name for a morning when the sun is brave. What remains in the basin after all of this is not absence. It is habit. Horses still breathe like partners. Tents still rehearse their gentle trick of being both wall and lung. Kettles still hum and are humoured. Men still argue about knots as if knots were metaphysics. Women still keep a chest in which the past and the future share a folded place. A child's first bronze buckle lying beside a scrap of cloth from a market that no longer exists. The river keeps its opinion about everything and expresses it only by continuing. The stars decline to be involved. This is their wisdom. If you walk down to the bank on a night when the air has decided to be kind, you will see lights on both sides again, though they belong to different people now and speak slightly different languages to the water. The echoes of hoofbeats do not vanish, they learn to be the background rhythm for other songs. You can still find a field somewhere that will let you hear, if you close your eyes, how men once decided not to insist when insisting would have been ruin. You can find a road that remembers a column passing lightly, and another that remembers wagons heavy with someone's idea of tribute, which turned out to be a temporary word for time. Take the memory of the metronome with you. It is not an exciting memory. It is the quiet mathematics that kept a winter from sharpening its teeth. Take the memory of the ring, whether it existed or not. It is the idea that West was a question, not an answer, and that questions sometimes need to be ridden toward, not because certainty waits there, but because maps are happier when used. Take the legend of the shepherd's sword if it helps you sit taller. Take the story of a bishop who spoke to a rider as if both men had the same god and the same number of fingers. These stories are the soft gear of history. They do not break when dropped, and when the night asks for a last sound, let it be the familiar one. The kettle's low agreement, the felt's patient breath, the horse shifting its weight like a sentence moving from a difficult clause into its gentle ending. The river, pleased to be what it is. The stars, content to be necessary but not intrusive. You have walked with riders whose empire could be folded and carried and unfolded again without losing its shape. Until the day came when the shape wished to be many shapes and was allowed. That is a kind of ending that deserves to be called a beginning and also a kind of sleep. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.